Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. From the outside, it looked like peace. 40 acres, a quiet barn, a sleepy hound. But behind that red roof was a secret. Surveillance gear, DEA intel, and a ticking clock. And across the fence, a nosy HOA queen about to stir up a storm that could blow the whole operation wide open. They say peace and quiet are the greatest luxuries in life. From the outside, I suppose that's exactly what my little slice of land looks like. 40 acres of open range just outside the county line, with a modest farmhouse, a red metal-roofed barn, a couple of horses, and a lazy hound dog named Duke, who spends more time napping than barking. To most folks driving by, I'm just another guy living the simple life. Mark Bennett, 39, single, works with his hands, keeps to himself. The kind of man who would rather mend a fence than make small talk. And that's exactly the impression I need to give. But my life isn't simple, not even close. The truth is, I'm a field agent for the DEA. I've worked undercover operations across 5 states in the last 10 years, and my current assignment might be the most delicate yet. A growing synthetic drug network has taken root in several counties, spreading fast and quiet like a wildfire beneath dry grass. Our intel points to a supply ring operating just across the border, people laundering cash through shell companies, hiding product in plain sight. We've got eyes on several suspects, one of whom lives uncomfortably close. That's where the barn comes in. To the untrained eye, it's just a typical agricultural structure, but inside, a fully equipped surveillance post, cameras with long-range IR, satellite uplink, signal jammers, server racks humming behind a false wall. I've got logs of vehicle movement, phone pings, and heat signatures mapped across 3 properties, including one that belongs to a man we believe coordinates regional distribution. A man who, incidentally, is the nephew of the self-proclaimed queen of this neighborhood, Karen Jennings. Karen lives just across the way, in one of those HOA-plagued subdivisions where every mailbox matches and people measure your lawn height with a ruler. She's president of the local HOA, a title she wields like a sheriff's badge, and from the moment I moved in, she's been circling. First, it was neighborly curiosity, a pie in a tin, a brochure about acceptable fencing styles. Then it turned territorial, questions about my unregistered structures, complaints about the disruptive antennas on my barn roof, veiled concerns. About suspicious activity, I kept my responses polite and minimal. Low profile, limited engagement. But the thing about people like Karen is, they mistake silence for weakness. The deeper our investigation gets, the more she pokes around, almost like she senses there's something off. And maybe she's not entirely wrong, but she has no idea just how far out of her depth she is. It started with a knock, not the polite kind either, the sort of knock that comes with an agenda. I just finished replacing the bearings on my tractor's front axle and was elbow deep in grease when I heard it. 3 sharp raps on the front door, followed by a pause, then 2 more. Calculated, like she practiced it. I wiped my hands on an old rag and opened the door, already knowing who it was. Karen Jennings stood there in a pressed HOA windbreaker, holding a clipboard like it was a gavel. Behind her sunglasses, her expression was the usual cocktail of authority and judgment. She didn't bother with a greeting. "Mr. Bennett," she began, voice clipped, "we need to talk about your barn." I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "It's my barn. What about it?" She flipped the clipboard around and presented a stapled packet of papers, HOA bylaw updates supposedly. The words Structure Compliance Addendum were bolded in Comic Sans, which told me everything I needed to know about the professionalism of this operation. As you may be aware, the HOA recently passed a resolution to ensure all secondary structures within visual range of Oak Meadows are in accordance with our updated aesthetic and safety standards. Your barn is visible from 3 homes on Sycamore Ridge, and its design does not conform to our community guidelines. I didn't even blink. "Karen, this property isn't part of your HOA. It never has been. Your subdivision starts a quarter mile past my fence line." "That's debatable," she snapped. "We have reason to believe your land was intended for future inclusion in the Oak Meadows Extension Project. There are historic planning maps." I cut her off with a chuckle. "Intentions don't change zoning laws or property lines. I've got my deed. It's not under your jurisdiction." Karen pressed on like a wind-up doll. Regardless, the barn has unsightly features that are concerning, particularly the large antenna array, the reflective panels on the roof, and that strange humming sound reported by one of our residents. There is suspicion, well-founded I might add, that this structure is being used for non-agricultural purposes. I'm here to notify you that the HOA is exercising its right to inspect. I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch just enough to make her shift her weight. You are not inspecting anything, I said finally. This is private land. You and your board don't have any authority here, and if you, or anyone you represent, steps foot past that fence uninvited, it'll be treated as trespassing. That barn is locked, monitored, and off-limits. Karen bristled. Are you refusing access to a designated HOA officer performing a community compliance check? Without question. There was a beat, then a slight flare in her nostrils as she squared her shoulders. You're making a mistake, Mr. Bennett. If you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't be afraid of a little transparency. I leaned in slightly. If I were you, I'd be very careful where you step next. She didn't answer, just turned on her heel and walked off, heels crunching the gravel like gunshots. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. But I knew that silence meant one thing. She wasn't done. It was just after sunrise when the perimeter alarm pinged. Not loud, just a soft chime through the earpiece I wore while doing morning chores. I was out by the trough with Duke, feeding the horses, still savoring the quiet air that comes before the heat settles in. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or a stray coyote brushing past the fence line. But when I checked the feed from the south camera on my phone, the view showed something much more irritating. There she was, Karen Jennings, in full HOA regalia, like she was leading a parade. Only this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man in a gray uniform with a badge that looked official if you squinted hard enough. Oak Meadows Community Enforcement read the patch, but from what I could tell, he was just some rent-a-cop with a radio clipped to his belt and an oversized keyring hanging from his hip like it gave him power. They were standing right in front of my barn's double doors, and the guard had one hand already on the padlock, like he was trying to figure out how to force it without causing too much noise. I dropped the bucket I was carrying and made a direct line across the field. Duke trotted beside me, sensing my tension. I didn't run. I wanted them to see me coming, let them feel the pressure of getting caught in the act. By the time I reached the barn, they were whispering, startled by my presence, but not nearly as apologetic as they should have been. Step away from the doors, I said flatly. Karen turned toward me, eyes narrowed and voice already raised like she was the one being wronged. Mr. Bennett, I have every right to inspect this building under community protocol. You were warned. You were also told this is private land, I shot back. Not subject to your rules, not part of your HOA, and certainly not open for unauthorized entry. The guard took a cautious step back, hands up. He looked like he just realized this wasn't going to be the routine nuisance call Karen had sold him. Karen, on the other hand, stood her ground. I'm calling the police, she declared. If you're going to hide behind property rights, then maybe the county sheriff can make sense of what's going on in that barn. You've got equipment back there that's not agricultural. You've got antennas and a power draw that's completely abnormal for a building like this. You don't know what you're talking about, I said, keeping my voice even but firm. Her hand was already dialing. She turned slightly away and began speaking into the phone, loud enough for me to hear every word. Yes, 911. I need to report a potential threat. There's a man refusing inspection of a suspicious structure. We believe he may be storing hazardous materials or even weapons. He's hostile and has refused to cooperate with our community safety officer. She turned back toward me, smug now, eyes locked on mine like she expected me to panic. But I didn't move, didn't flinch. I just crossed my arms, watching her. Let her dig. Let her build her case. Every word she spoke was being recorded by 4 hidden microphones mounted along the barn's eaves. Every second of video from her arrival to this exact moment was already uploading to a secure server in Virginia. You're making a federal case out of this, I said under my breath. Karen, of course, heard what she wanted. Exactly. That's what it might come to. The sheriff's cruiser rolled up 15 minutes later, kicking a cloud of dust across my driveway. 2 deputies stepped out, one young with a tight jaw and twitchy eyes, the other older with the look of someone who'd seen one too many domestic disputes before finishing his first cup of coffee. Karen flagged them down like she was guiding in a rescue helicopter, one arm waving in wide arcs, voice already climbing into a theatrical register. There, that's him. That's the man I called about, she barked, pointing at me as if I were crouched behind cover with a rifle instead of standing calmly beside my dog and barn. I stayed where I was, arms loose at my sides, gaze level. The deputies split as they approached. Young guy to Karen, older one to me. The senior officer glanced me over, taking in my relaxed posture, the barn behind me, the dog sitting dutifully at my heel. He stopped about 10 feet away, hands visible. "Morning," he said. "You Mark Bennett?" I nodded. "Yes, sir." He paused a beat, studying me. "We got a report about a suspected illegal structure and possible hazardous materials on site. Mind explaining what's going on?" I pulled my wallet from my back pocket and opened it slowly, revealing the leather badge case. The gold and blue emblem inside gleamed in the morning light. "Special Agent Mark Bennett, DEA," I said clearly. "This is a federally protected operations site. I'm currently assigned undercover, operating under joint jurisdiction with the Department of Justice. Everything you see here, including the surveillance infrastructure in that barn, is fully authorized and classified. Your body cam's recording." He blinked once, then slowly nodded. "Yes." "Good," I said, then turned slightly and pointed at Karen, who had stopped mid-rant with the younger deputy. That woman knowingly crossed into private property and attempted forced entry into a secure federal surveillance facility. She brought an unlicensed private security contractor and tried to bypass a locked structure after being explicitly warned to stay away. I have audio and video of the entire incident, which has already been logged and uploaded to the secure DEA server in Richmond. The younger deputy looked like someone had just slapped him with a cold fish. Karen, to her credit, didn't faint, but her face drained of color fast. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. No sound came out. The older deputy cleared his throat. "We, weren't informed this was a federal site, because you weren't supposed to be," I replied. "This is a black status op. Compartmentalized access only. And now, thanks to her stunt, it's compromised." Karen suddenly found her voice. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding. I thought he was just hiding something dangerous. My nephew said." I raised an eyebrow at that, but didn't speak. The older officer turned toward her, expression stiffer now. "Ma'am, you're going to need to remain on site and answer a few questions. You may want to sit down." "I didn't do anything wrong," she snapped, but her tone lacked the usual venom. I turned to the officer. "I'll coordinate with my supervisor and have the local field office issue a formal report. In the meantime, I'd recommend you collect her statement carefully. There's a good chance she just interfered with a federal investigation." He nodded again, slower this time. As I walked away, back toward the house, I didn't look back. Let her feel what it's like when the ground shifts under your feet. Karen didn't go quietly, not at first. She spent the better part of the afternoon pacing the edge of my property with that wounded predator look in her eye, muttering into her phone, likely calling every HOA board member and church friend who would still pick up. But the damage was done. By nightfall, the feds had already sent a regional supervisor to review the incident. I filed my report, submitted the footage, and by the next morning, Karen Jennings had become a name of significant interest. 2 agents from our internal legal affairs division paid her a visit that evening, this time with a polite but firm warrant for electronic correspondence and personal statements. According to their report, she answered the door still wearing her HOA windbreaker, as if clinging to the last threads of her imaginary authority. They asked questions. She tried to pivot, posture, and plead. But somewhere in the middle of the interview, when she realized these weren't just cops with traffic tickets, something cracked. Her story shifted. She admitted, first cautiously, then with the resignation of someone trying to pre-spin the fallout, that she'd known her nephew was involved in things. The phrasing was careful, calculated. "He's made some mistakes," she said. "Hung around with the wrong crowd." But it didn't take long before the truth bled out. Her nephew, Jeremy Jennings, had been under DEA surveillance for 9 months as part of the trafficking network we were zeroing in on. And Karen? She'd known about it. Worse, she'd seen me watching. She told the agents she grew suspicious of me shortly after I moved in, when she noticed I spent more time near the barn than in the house. She claimed I was constantly checking the horizon with binoculars and that suspicious vehicles had come and gone late at night. What she didn't know was that those vehicles were feds, rotating shifts of surveillance support and tech calibration. To Karen, they were proof of something criminal. Ironically, she wasn't wrong. She just misjudged who the criminal was. Digging deeper, we found her digital footprint was damning. She'd exchanged encrypted messages with her nephew using a burner messaging app. While the language was vague, "Make sure you park near the fence, not the driveway. He's definitely watching the place." The intent was clear. She had been feeding him information about my movements. Whether she knew exactly who I was is still uncertain, but one thing was obvious. She tried to interfere. And when Jeremy caught wind of surveillance heat, he tried to ghost, changed numbers, shut down his business, went quiet. But we'd already mapped his pattern. The moment Karen made contact with 911 and initiated a false report against me, she not only triggered obstruction charges, she flagged herself as a potential co-conspirator. Whether she meant to or not, her actions jeopardized months of careful surveillance, risked exposing undercover agents, and nearly compromised a sting operation that could take down half a dozen traffickers. When confronted with this in a second interview, she folded completely. Tears, apologies, denials. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said. "I just wanted him to stop watching Jeremy. I thought maybe if I gave him a reason to leave." Intent didn't matter anymore. Interference was interference. And the barn, the one she tried to force her way into, was logged in multiple agency records as an active DEA surveillance hub. She didn't just trespass, she walked into a hornet's nest with a lighter. By the end of the week, the U.S. Attorney's Office filed preliminary charges, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to interfere with a federal investigation, and attempted unlawful entry into a secured facility. She was served in the comfort of her own pastel-colored kitchen, between an untouched fruit bowl and a ceramic Live, Laugh, Love plaque on the wall. The morning of Jeremy Jennings's arrest was unseasonably calm. The humidity had finally lifted, the sky a crisp pale blue as unmarked SUVs rolled silently through the back road that looped behind Karen's neighborhood. From my position in the barn, now officially designated a temporary operations post, I watched it all unfold through thermal lenses and live drone feed. Jeremy stepped outside just before 8, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, oblivious to the noose tightening around him. He barely made it to his car before the agents closed in. No struggle, no shouting. Just the quiet, clinical precision of a takedown, long in the making. They found everything. Pills, precursors, burner phones, ledgers, and enough encrypted messages to tie him to 2 other regional suppliers. His network crumbled in a single day. And the cherry on top? When questioned, Jeremy admitted that yes, he'd been warned someone was watching him, and that warning came from a family member across the street who said the new guy was bad news. Her words, his memory. Karen didn't show her face for 2 full days after the arrest. Her house went dark. No porch lights, no movement, blinds drawn tighter than a drum. But word spread fast. This was suburbia, after all. One whisper in the cul-de-sac turned into 30 text chains and a storm on Nextdoor. When residents learned that not only had Karen interfered with a federal investigation, but had done so to protect her drug-dealing nephew, the fallout was immediate and brutal. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, which, ironically, Karen had scheduled days before, intending to discuss property aesthetics violations and non-cooperative neighbors. Instead, she walked into a room full of grim faces and folded arms. Some had printed out news clippings. Others had screenshots of the 911 transcript and photos of her standing beside Jeremy at barbecues, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. One board member stood up and read from a pre-written statement. The actions of Karen Jennings have not only endangered this community, but brought irreparable harm to the reputation of Oak Meadows Homeowners Association. Effective immediately, we are stripping her of her presidency and referring all further inquiries to our legal counsel. No fanfare, no argument, just silence. Karen didn't say a word, just nodded slightly, like she'd already rehearsed the scene in her head. She left through the side door, avoiding the press waiting on the front lawn. Within days, the HOA received a formal warning from the county prosecutor's office for overreach of authority and unauthorized interference with private property. Karen had been using HOA letterhead to justify her snooping for months, sending out baseless citations, threatening fines, even attempting to change neighborhood rules without proper votes. Her entire regime collapsed under the weight of exposure. What followed was almost poetic. Neighbors who'd been too afraid to push back finally found their voices. They rescinded a dozen nuisance policies. They formed a new board, this time with actual checks and balances. And most satisfying of all, they issued a formal apology, not just to me, but publicly, printed in the local paper and delivered door to door. We apologize to Mark Bennett for the harassment and unauthorized actions carried out by former HOA President Karen Jennings. We were unaware of her misconduct and are committed to rebuilding trust within our community. A little late, sure, but I'll admit, it felt good to read. I stayed just long enough to finish what I'd come to do. The operation officially closed 2 weeks after Jeremy's arrest. The network had been dismantled, the supply lines broken, and the indictments were moving through the courts like dominoes. My part was over. The barn was stripped of its equipment, the surveillance rigs packed and shipped, leaving behind nothing but the shell of a structure and a faint buzz of what had once been a hidden war room. Standing inside on my last night with only the wind slipping through the rafters, I felt the weight lift, not just of the assignment, but of the constant restraint, the mask I'd worn. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. There was no farewell cookout, no waves from the porch as I drove out. That wasn't my role. I was the outsider, the quiet man on the hill with the too quiet barn. And that's exactly what they'd remember, if they remembered me at all. Still, I left something behind. The morning I departed, I nailed a sign to the front of the barn's weathered doors. Nothing flashy, just white paint on reclaimed wood, hand stenciled and bolted in place. DEA field station and operation complete. Karen, you're in the report now. It stayed up for at least 3 days. I know because one of the new HOA board members emailed a photo to the agency's general inbox with a polite note. This is hilarious. Tell Agent Bennett thanks for cleaning up the neighborhood. No signature, just a smiley face. The irony still made me chuckle as I crossed the state line. From what I heard through quiet channels, Karen took a plea deal. Avoided jail time but was hit with a federal fine, a 2-year ban on holding any leadership role in a registered organization, and mandatory compliance training through a DOJ program. Her house went up for sale not long after. The listing made no mention of proximity to federal surveillance zones. But the neighborhood changed. You could feel it, like someone had opened a window in a stale room. People talked again, not whispered, but actually talked. Kids played on sidewalks without being scolded for unsafe laughter. Homeowners planted what they wanted, painted their mailboxes whatever damn color they pleased. It wasn't lawless, it was free. And that's a distinction some people never understand until the grip lets go. Before I left for good, I took Duke for one last walk around the property. He didn't know it was goodbye. Dogs rarely get sentimental. But I did. We stopped beneath the old oak at the edge of the pasture, the one with the view of the whole spread. Barn, house, the line of pine trees cutting off oak meadows in the distance. I let the silence settle for a few minutes, just breathing it in. It had never really been mine, not in the permanent sense. This place was a chapter, important, messy, necessary, but I'd be lying if I said it hadn't gotten under my skin a little. Enough that I'd miss the way the porch creaked in the afternoon sun, or how the land sloped just right at dusk. As I loaded Duke into the truck and climbed behind the wheel, I caught one last glimpse of the barn through the rear-view mirror. The sign was still hanging, and for the first time in weeks I smiled. Not the tight, guarded grin of someone undercover, but the real kind. The kind that comes when a job's done, justice is served, and the enemy doesn't even realize how thoroughly they've lost. Somewhere, there's another assignment waiting. But here, this chapter's closed.